Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching a special broadcast here on DD India. We're calling it Afghanistan, What Next? Now, I want to show you a time-lapse video. I've chosen a period of 3 months, 90 days to be precise, to give you, the viewer, a sense of how much Afghanistan has changed in the short span of time. Take a look. Now, for a country whose situation changes by the day, sometimes by the hour, this map is at once illustrative and instructive. It should give you an idea of the strength of the Taliban as compared to the Afghan government. Take a look at the video again, and this time look carefully at the colors crimson and grey. The crimson depicts the areas controlled by the Taliban and the grey by the government of Afghanistan. Also, keep an eye on the date at the bottom. Now, this video was published by the Long War Journal. It's a US news website, also described as a blog, which reports on the war on terror. It is associated with a Washington, D.C. based think tank called Foundation for Defense of Democracies. So to recap what you just saw, on 13th April, the Afghan government controlled more districts than the Taliban. 127 to the government and 77 to the Taliban. Now remember, Afghanistan has 34 provinces and 400 odd districts. Now the tables turned by July. On 10th July, the Taliban controlled 215 districts as compared to just 73 by the Afghan government. The Taliban claims to control 85% of Afghanistan. Well, it is exaggerated, but you know what? It would not be an exaggeration to say that the districts are indeed falling like 9 pins to the Taliban. By all indications, the Taliban controls more than 50% of Afghanistan today. Now, 1st May was the date by when the US should have completely pulled out its troops from Afghanistan, as per the 29th February 2020 agreement reached between the then US President Donald Trump and the Taliban in Doha, Qatar. Now, since that date, that is 1st May, the Taliban has quickly gained ground. In some places, the Afghan police and security personnel gave up without a fight. It was that easy for the Taliban. Here's a video that a journalist working for the Long War Journal says shows Afghan security forces surrendering in Karabakh of Ghazni province. Here's another video. It shows the Afghan forces surrendering in Saidabad district of Wardak province. Now, this is the district where the Taliban shot down a US helicopter and killed 30 US personnel in August 2011. Now, the Taliban said at the time that it did it to avenge Osama bin Laden's killing in May 2011. And here's a third video showing the Taliban fighters with captured Humvees in Baraki Barak district of Logar province. Now, the district is today fully under Taliban control. By all accounts, the Taliban controls more than 50% of the districts and 40% of the Afghan population, that's about 13 million, now lives in Taliban-controlled districts. So, to come back to my original question, what next for Afghanistan? If the Taliban keeps up its offensive, it could, I'm carefully choosing my words here, could overrun Afghanistan within months, 6 months, according to a US intelligence estimate. But Biden believes otherwise.
Your own intelligence community has assessed that the Afghan government will likely collapse.
That is not true.
Can you please clarify what they have told you about whether that will happen or not?
That is not true. They did not reach that conclusion.
So what is the level of confidence that they have that it will not collapse?
The Afghan government and leadership has to come together. They clearly have the capacity to sustain the government in place. The question is, will they generate the kind of cohesion to do it? It's not a question of whether they have the capacity. They have the capacity. They have the forces. They have the equipment. The question is, will they do it? Now,
you know how journalists are. We can be unrelenting at times. So here's more from the exchange between Biden and reporters.
Is a Taliban takeover of Afghanistan now inevitable?
no, it is not.
Why?
Because you have the Afghan troops have 300,000 well equipped as any army in the world, and an air force against something like 75,000 Taliban. It is not inevitable.
A Taliban takeover of Afghanistan is not inevitable, says Biden. But the question is, can the Taliban be trusted?
Do you trust the Taliban, Mr. President? Do you trust the Taliban, sir?
Is that a serious question?
It's absolutely a serious question. Do you trust the Taliban?
No, I do not.
So if Biden does not trust the Taliban, why should anyone else? And that's not the only perplexing issue. There are more. For instance, Biden explains or justifies his decision to pull out his troops from Afghanistan by saying, I quote, "Today, the terrorist threat has metastasized beyond Afghanistan, so we are repositioning our resources and adapting our counter-terrorism posture to meet the threats where they are now significantly higher in South Asia, West Asia, and Africa," unquote. Meanwhile, the Taliban has a very clear twofold strategy. One, it wants to control or seize rural districts. Now, doing so allows it to surround key cities and put pressure on population centers. And two, it wants to control key border crossings in order to cut off revenue to the Afghan government. Now, you need to understand something here. Border crossings serve as dry ports for goods shipped overseas. The Taliban now controls 3 of Afghanistan's 8 dry ports. The first on the border with Tajikistan, the second on the border with Iran, and the third one on the border with Turkmenistan. Now, they are Shir Khan in Kunduz province near the border with Tajikistan, Islam Kala near Iran, and Torgundi border crossing near Turkmenistan. Now, the Islam Kala crossing is one of the biggest trade gateways into Iran, generating an estimated $20 million in monthly revenue for the Afghan government. The Torgundi border town is one of 2 trade gateways into Turkmenistan, and the Shir Khan border crossing in northern Kunduz province connects Afghanistan with Tajikistan. Now, Russia says the Taliban controls about 2/3 of the Afghanistan-Tajikistan border, and Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said on 9th July, and I quote her here, "We have noted a sharp rise in tension on the Afghan-Tajik border. The Taliban movement quickly occupied a large part of border districts and currently controls about 2/3 of the border," unquote. Now, reports suggest that more than 1,000 Afghan troops fled into neighboring Tajikistan after a blistering offensive by the insurgents in the north of Afghanistan. The fighting in the north also forced Moscow to close its consulate in the city of Mazar-e-Sharif, the capital of Balkh province and one of Afghanistan's largest urban centers near the border with Uzbekistan. For its part, the US Defense Ministry said on 11th July that the momentum is with the Taliban. What about the human cost of war, you might wonder? Well, an April 2021 report by the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan says the number of civilians killed and injured during the first 3 months of 2021 is significantly higher than a year ago. The Afghanistan Protection of Civilians in Armed Conflict 2021 first quarter report documents 573 killed and 1,210 injured. It's a 29% increase compared with the same period last year. So the total number of civilians killed and injured is 1,783. And the Taliban is responsible for more than 60% of those casualties. Of particular concern is a 37% increase in the number of women killed and injured, and a 23% increase in child casualties compared with the first quarter of 2020. Now, the Taliban enjoys patronage of elements in Pakistan. The Quetta Shura, for instance, remains active. It has not been disbanded. The Quetta Shura comprises the leaders of the Afghan Taliban and is based in the city of Quetta in the Balochistan province of Pakistan. Listen to this Pakistani minister who gloats about the close links between the Taliban and Pakistan.
तालिबान की या दूसरे जो वहाँ लोग हैं उनकी फैमिलीज यहाँ रहती हैं, पाकिस्तान में है, जुराबात है, लोईबीर है, ये बनी गाला, सॉरी क्या है, मदी से पहले जो हमारा आता है बाराको है, तरनोल है. इसी के अलावा देखिए एक बहुत बड़ा उनकी बाज डेड बॉडीज भी आ जाती हैं. बाज मेडिकल ट्रीटमेंट के लिए भी लोग, बाज हॉस्पिटल्स ऐसे हैं जहां उनकी ट्रीटमेंट होती है.
All right, time to bring in my guests, Ambassador T.C.A. Raghavan, General Shashi Bhushan Asthana, Mr. Nandan Unnikrishnan, and Mr. Altaf Najafizada. Let me quickly introduce my guests to you. Ambassador Raghavan is a former Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan and Singapore. He served as the Joint Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, dealing with the Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran desk, and is also an accomplished author. General Asthana is a veteran infantry general with decades of experience in national and international affairs, including the UN. He is currently Chief Instructor at the United Service Institution of India, a national security and defense services think tank based in New Delhi. Mr. Unnikrishnan is a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, a privately held think tank headquartered in New Delhi. He looks after the Eurasia Program of Studies, and he began his career as a journalist with the Press Trust of India, which is the largest news agency in India. And Altaf Najafizada is an Afghan journalist. He works for Bloomberg News in New Delhi, and his primary focus or area of interest is Afghanistan and South Asia. Altaf, if we can start with you, how bad is the situation in Afghanistan today as we speak? Is the balance of power shifting decisively towards the Taliban?
Well, as you know, the Afghanistan situation is dire, and the Taliban, they are on the move to take over a lot of territories, districts across the country. And they have been capturing the districts, a lot of districts, like tens of districts, more than 150 districts according to sources they have captured in the past 2 months since the United States announced their withdrawal news from Afghanistan. So that kind of boosted the Taliban's morale to increase their violence and conflict across the country in order to take over more territory. So the battle has been intensified in Afghanistan between the warring groups, between the Afghan government and the Taliban. And the Taliban are trying to, the Taliban's real intentions by taking over lots of districts. Their real intention is to take over the power once again bringing back their harsh Islamic system back to Afghanistan, installing their own style of harsh Islamic government in Afghanistan. So, in the midst of the conflict, Afghanistan is on the brink of humanitarian crisis. The conflict has forced a lot of people living on those contested areas to flee those areas, internally displaced, because according to United Nations figures, like 300,000 Afghan people were internally displaced from in Afghanistan.
Right.
So overall, we could say that the situation is worse, and it's getting worse every day on a daily basis by the increasing conflict between the warring groups.
Indeed. Ambassador Raghavan, coming to you now, help our viewers understand about India's interests in Afghanistan. India is a major development partner. It has put in several billions of dollars into projects in Afghanistan. So what is at stake really for India in Afghanistan?
Well, what is at stake for India really is the principal question of what is going to happen in Afghanistan. You see, our relationship with Afghanistan cannot be seen within the lens of an economic partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Our aid program in Afghanistan has not been in the nature of a financial or a commercial investment. It is really an investment in the future of Afghanistan by investing in its human resources development and its hard and soft infrastructure. Now, what happens to that infrastructure and human resources potential in the midst of a military conflict is a very, very difficult question to answer. And really, it is a question to which only Afghans themselves can provide the answer. So the question of what relationship Afghanistan will have, not just with India, but also with the rest of the world, will depend very much on what happens in Afghanistan. Really, I think there is a great deal at stake because India and Afghanistan are countries with a civilizational relationship, a very long history going back to before the first millennium and so on. But in a conflict situation,
Mm-hmm.
what happens with Afghans' relationships with other countries becomes a factor or becomes a function of what is the outcome of that conflict. And that, as Altaf just mentioned, the situation looks very serious. Perhaps it has been magnified to some extent because of the certain amount of confusion which has been sowed on account of the manner of the US withdrawal and the way US policy has optically presented itself. But it is very much an open question about what is going to happen in Afghanistan.
Indeed. Mr. Unikrishnan, if I may request you to look in the rear view mirror, so to speak. You were among the last journalists to interview Ahmad Shah Massoud in 2001. Looking at Afghanistan today as we speak, do you have a sense of deja vu that's, we are back to the future, so to speak?
I mean, it's a very good question. And the difference this time only is that the Taliban appears to have learnt those historical lessons. And if you notice on the ground, they're beginning to cut off the border areas, mm-hmm. and they're not necessarily looking at controlling the inner pockets of so-called resistance that may exist. They have learnt the lesson that last time around, the support for the opposition to the Taliban had actually a landline access. It was land access, and it did make a difference. On the ground, however, today, I am not, while I agree that the Taliban has become entirely active and is taking over significant territories, I am not entirely certain that the outcome of control over the country is yet decided.
Okay.
I am certain that there will be resistance. There are problems and nuances even within the opposition to the Taliban. There are, leadership issues and all that. But nevertheless, I think that the resistance will be there. The second question is, I also think that outside support for that resistance this time may be a little bit more covert, because many of the people or the countries that were openly supportive of Ahmed Shah Massoud this time have started relationships, if you want, with the Taliban, be it the Russians, be it the Iranians, be it, now there are reports that India is also undertaking some kind of outreach. So therefore, it will become a very difficult balancing act. Although, if you are a great power, supporting with one hand and opposing with another should not be something that comes with great difficulty. So yes, I mean, in a short, is it deja vu? Not exactly. But there are some elements that are reminiscent. The resurgent Taliban, the opposition. Is the outcome certain? I'm not sure.
Right. General Astana, can we have a military perspective from you? Now, by all indications, Taliban has a twofold strategy in place. One, capture rural districts and put pressure on cities with civilian, greater civilian population. And two, control key border crossings with neighbors, namely Iran, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan. So what is the Taliban really playing for here, General Astana?
If you see the military strategy perspective of Taliban, as of now, firstly, they have the offensive spirit, which is one of the basic principles. Secondly, as Nandan mentioned, they've learned the lessons. So therefore, what they're doing is cutting off the border areas so that you don't get the aid from there, cutting off the road communication, also inserting themselves between two major townships. And also, in addition to that, they are being professionally guided. There are about 7,200 or something like that terrorists from Pakistan. And I think a professional guidance from Pakistan is also there, because the way they are going about it is something like a professional military operation. As far as Afghan forces are concerned and other opposition is concerned. Now, Afghan forces, firstly, there is a defensive mindset. They are more banking on the urban centers, thinking that that will give them much more resistance. Whereas Taliban now is looking at that we don't want to enter the cities because they know the numbers of Taliban. The Talibans are about 50, 60,000, and Afghan forces all put together will be about 4 to 5 times. So they know that they don't have numbers on their side. So they will not get into the fighting in built up areas. So what they are trying is that we will remain outside, we will isolate, and then we will be able to thumb the table, produce perhaps much more impact on the negotiation table in case there is a negotiation, because they are going to talk in Doha. And what they are looking towards is that either it could be anything. It could be either the forced occupation, or it could be a government which could be a hybrid government, in that if they control more, they get more stakes without elections. Now that is what Taliban has it in mind. Now similarly, at the same breath, I must also tell you a little bit about the military strategy of United States. You see why the situation has come to this stage. Because there is a military principle or strategic principle to say that you should select and maintain your aim. When United States entered Afghanistan, the aim was that dismantle Taliban, because they were aiding Al-Qaeda, who attacked 9/11. So therefore, that was the aim. Had they finished after dislodging Afghanistan and killing Osama bin Laden, declared victory and gone back, they would have not reached the culmination point well before they could exhaust Taliban. Now, Taliban never got exhausted. Ideology does not have a military solution. Now, this is a second mistake, strategic mistake which they did. Thirdly, they wanted, perhaps they thought that in the people's war, center of gravity in such operations is people. Now, in people's war, no foreign recipe is going to bring peace in Afghanistan, that is for sure. It has to be intra-Afghan dialogue, which will bring any kind of semblance if it has to. Even before US intervention, Afghanistan was in a state when there are a whole lot of tribes, there are Hazaras, there are Pashtuns, everybody has different interests. Even within the government, they were all not on the same page. So this is a situation which is there. More I will come a little later in the next session.
Indeed.
Back to you.
Absolutely. Altaf, if I can come back to you. Now, there is a lot of talk about an transitional government or interim government or accommodating the Taliban in some way or another going forward, number one. Number two, the intra-Afghan talks are, I'm told, are going nowhere because the talks are stalled. So what happens to the ordinary Afghans going forward? Are they going to remain in limbo for the foreseeable future, given the uncertainties that, swirl around them?
Yeah, the uncertainty is actually the problem for everyone in Afghanistan, because Afghanistan's future, nobody can expect what is happening tomorrow or in the next month or in the next 6 months. The peace talks are at stalemate. It's gone nowhere. It has provided no productive results between the Taliban and Afghan government. In response to Mr. Nandan about the resistance of the people. Well, we have uprising forces. I mean, the local civilians, they have been armed, provided weapons by the local commanders in order to stand against the Taliban's advance in northern Afghanistan or other parts of the country. So, if you compare it, the current situation, I mean, you compare it now, the Taliban of the time being, and we had a situation in 2001. We have, well, in 2001, we were not too much united people. But for now, we have, the politician leaders, they have come together and they have been united against the Taliban, like we could see Gulbuddin Hekmatyar or other warlords like General Bisson. They have all come together and standing against the Taliban as a one group. But previously in 2001 or in the 1990s, they were all disunited people, So for now, we have those uprising people, local commanders standing against the Taliban, and the resistance is tougher this time against the Taliban.
Right. Ambassador Raghavan, now you were one of two former Indian diplomats who took part in the November 2018 Moscow conference, to which Taliban was also invited. Looking from your perspective, Ambassador Raghavan, what are your thoughts on the outreach or contacts between India and the Taliban, reports of which have appeared in the media in particular, and also this frequently asked question, can the Taliban be trusted?
Well, it's very difficult to answer this question because there is in fact very little clarity which has emerged from the Taliban itself. In retrospect, what is very clear is that over the past 2 or 3 years, what was being discussed was not so much an Afghan settlement, but a United States withdrawal. It was the withdrawal factor which was the principal engine driving events. The next stage in the evolution of Afghan's contemporary history will begin after that withdrawal is complete. And then perhaps we will have a clearer picture of what the Taliban exactly wants, because right now many of their positions are tactical so as to increase their bargaining power in anticipation of the next stage when it begins. My own sense is that to expect a very radical change in the mindset of the Taliban would be unrealistic. A force which has been fighting on the ground, it is in the nature of things that it gets more radicalized and not less radicalized. So I don't see any easy way out of a dilution in terms of expecting a dilution of what is a pretty regressive mindset. Most of the contacts which the journalists have had or which outside governments have been with the senior leadership of the Taliban. How influential that leadership will be as opposed to field commanders who have actually done the fighting and whose forces have been more radicalized by victory is very difficult to say. So I think it is very much of an open question, and therefore, while of course in the end, Afghanistan, as I said, is a country with which we have a old relationship, and whoever comes to power over there is someone we should be prepared to engage with, to deal with. But there are then very profound questions which come in about the legitimacy of that government. What is the attitude of the government with regard to the future of Afghanistan? Should the last 20 years be written off completely? I think these are the questions which are involved when we talk about India's future interface, if there is to be one, with the Taliban. It's not a simple question of just trying to reach an agreement with whoever appears to have the upper hand at the moment, because that would be an unrealistic and very short-term way of looking at the situation.
Indeed. Mr. Unnikrishnan, we've seen Afghanistan was a key topic of discussion bilaterally and regionally speaking in India's engagements in the recent past. We saw India's foreign minister travel to Moscow, his stopover in Tehran, on his way to Moscow as well. So we are seeing India becoming increasingly engaged with countries such as Russia and Iran. Of course, Afghanistan is also there in the picture, in the mix. So how do you look at the scope for regional cooperation or a regional dynamic to come into play going forward in terms of stabilizing Afghanistan going forward, including countries such as India, Russia, or Iran for that matter?
Well, I personally believe that if you look at the countries that you mentioned, all of us share a common desire to see Afghanistan as a stable country, as a country from which, for want of better words, there is no export of extremism. I think that is a common shared vision. However, how to get there is a fundamental problem, which I believe currently many governments are grappling with. I think we are sharing ideas. I am not privy to those discussions, but I would imagine that India, Russia, and Iran would be in the thick of trying to understand how they can contribute towards the stabilization of Afghanistan. The other aspect is that there is an SCO meeting going on. It is about Afghanistan. Our foreign minister is there. He's meeting with all the regional leaders. So, and there is Pakistan and China there also. So I think a regional solution or a regional understanding will emerge. I mean, there is little doubt about that. But I don't think we can with certainty say today what kind of understanding it will be and what direction things will move, because the situation within Afghanistan, and I think Ambassador Raghavan was absolutely right, the situation is rather fluid, and there are many questions that we have to address. I mean, are we going to just erase 20 years? Obviously not. I mean, you're not going to want to give up 20 years. Secondly, I completely share the principle that even if, let's assume for a moment, 6 or 8 months down the line, the Taliban actually score a military victory, I mean, does that mean that you forget about everything and start dealing only with them on their terms? These are issues that have to be resolved between all the partners. It's not only India. I mean, if you look at it in that sense, while India's interests are really great, India's physical footprint is rather light in Afghanistan. So it's the neighboring countries that also have to come and share the same vision.
General Asthana, Mr. Unnikrishnan spoke about India's footprint in Afghanistan, I want us to focus a bit more, if you will, on India-Afghanistan military, defense, and security cooperation. Now, my question to you is this. In your estimation, is the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces capable? Do they have the capacity to take on the Taliban, number one? And number two, do you, for one, encourage or support this school of thought which says India should become more involved in Afghanistan, short of boots on the ground, give them the military hardware, training, or even personnel for that matter?
As far as giving them hardware, military, and giving them hardware and training is concerned, I think India has already done it and has been doing it for quite some time now. As far as boots on ground is concerned, certainly it's a big no, for the simple reason because there is no logistic chain, a ground-based logistic chain which can support us, and therefore being two sides and being totally isolated there, it doesn't make sense. Thirdly, even China has echoed the same view. If USA and Russia have burnt their fingers, China has said in global times, we don't want to be the third country to burn our fingers, and certainly as India, we also don't want to be the next country to burn our fingers as well. As far as our interests are concerned, certainly those interests are important. In addition to what Ambassador has said, there is a connectivity angle also, which is very important. We want to connect to South Central Asian republics. The Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, where the foreign minister is going, are very much keen for the trilateral highway. There is a need for the shortest route to warm water access for these countries, both of them, is via Afghanistan, Iran. Similarly, Afghanistan warm water access is only via Iran. So this Chabahar initiative is a good initiative. We don't want it to go down the drain. The second thing is, as Ambassador mentioned, if and when, if by chance, if Taliban comes to power at some point of time, we will have to interact with them for the simple reason because even in Pakistan, when Musharraf after Kargil and after launching a coup came to power, we did interact with him because at the end of the day, it is permanent interests which matter. So we have interest in Afghanistan in a manner that we are otherwise not getting connected to CAR unless we physically capture POK. So that is the connectivity issue. And similarly, now coming to the as far as all other countries are concerned, the regional countries are concerned, certainly the export of terrorism is a major concern for everybody, including China, because they are also worried about TIM and their Xinjiang province. Similarly, and they don't mind buying Taliban to buy peace by not exporting TIM or helping TIM. As far as Pakistan is concerned, not that everything is hunky-dory. Of course, their guys are fighting there. But the fact is that between the TTP, a rejuvenated TTP is also not in their interest. And there are others also who will get rejuvenated in addition to that. Because once Afghanistan becomes the largest conglomeration of terrorist groups in the world, where almost every kind of terrorist group is there, and IS will also get a more elbow space to work there, it is not in the interest of all the regional players. Ramesh.
Right. Altaf, now taking off from the point where General Astana left, I want your take on the role of neighbors of Afghanistan, namely Pakistan. Do you see Pakistan as a part of the problem or solution? Now, there are close linkages between the Afghan Taliban and the TTP, for instance. They keep moving in and out of each other's territories. So in your estimation, what's been your reading of Pakistan's role in Afghanistan today and also going forward?
Well, it's difficult to answer this question. Well, what I have seen in Afghanistan, the people, the local people, they all have, they're all against Pakistan's policies toward Afghanistan. I mean, those politicians, Afghan politicians, they don't like, they hate Pakistan's policies being implemented in Afghanistan for their own favor. They see that Pakistan has been supporting the Taliban for quite a long time, since the Taliban was burned in Kandahar in 1990s and then came to power in Afghanistan. And once the Taliban came to power in Afghanistan, Pakistan and a few other countries were the only countries that they have acknowledged the Taliban's government. in Afghanistan. And once they were in power, the relationship between the Taliban and Pakistan was still close and cooperative in terms of business, politics, and Pakistan's influence was immense in Afghanistan during the Taliban time. And after the Taliban was removed, when they were removed from the power by the US invasion in 2001, well, Afghanistan has seen, was quite relatively calm for 3 or 4 years from 2001 and 2004, until the Taliban was rebounding in the bordering regions of Afghanistan and Pakistan. So after 2004, they were rebounding. They were massing fighters across the bordering regions. They went to bordering regions in Pakistan to build up their leadership and go on and so forth. Now we could see that Pakistan, everybody has to acknowledge, Pakistan has some sort of relationship with the Taliban, and they have some sort of influence with the Taliban. But the question, the concerning point for India is that when the Taliban comes to power, if they come to power by taking the power, by force, Pakistan's influence, of course, would be increased in Afghanistan, and it will be a concerning issue for India. India has the fears of seeing their influence in Afghanistan being declined by the Taliban's power in Afghanistan, which is being supported by Pakistan. And this is a regional concerning issue. Of course, it's sending alarming bells to the region, from Russia to Beijing, because of the concerning issue of exporting terrorism out of Afghanistan after the Taliban comes in with the power. The neighboring countries, is a problem for neighboring countries, even for Russia, even for Beijing, China. So now the Taliban are trying to negotiate with them by talking with them. They are going to China, they are going to Russia, they are going to other neighboring countries to convince them that once we take over the power in Afghanistan, our relationship would be friendly, we will have a constructive relationship among all the countries. They try to convince those people, those countries. They just met Russian officials in Moscow last week, or just a few days back. They had a constructive, meeting about the future of Afghanistan, about the future role of the Taliban, about the future power of the Taliban, and the relationship between these countries.
Right. Ambassador Raghavan, if I can ask you to amplify a bit more on the Pakistan's role in Afghanistan going forward. Now, the Quetta Shura remains intact. It's not been disbanded. Afghan Taliban maintains its links with their counterparts inside Pakistan. How do you see Pakistan's role in Afghanistan? And are there any specific concerns which you would like to highlight from India's perspective? And also, how do you view the recent ceasefire agreement between India and Pakistan, if you look at it in the regional context?
Well, as Altaf said, the problem, the root of the current situation is the very poor relationship between the Afghan government and Pakistan, and the very poor impression which the common Afghan has of Pakistan. The street level negativity about Pakistan is very, very evident in Afghanistan. Now, this is something which Pakistan finds very difficult to stomach because of its own stakes in Afghanistan, and these are legitimate stakes. The fact that it has in the past also done a great deal for Afghanistan, but it finds this poor state of relations with Afghanistan very difficult to swallow. And because of the securitization paradigm which exists in Pakistan, they tend to blame India for it. So in Pakistan, there is this highly amplified, exaggerated impression of Indian influence in Afghanistan, most of which is not true at all, but it leads to a certain zero-sum game approach. And that is what has led to the support for the Taliban, because the view that only a force or a group which listens to us should have control of Afghanistan, and that means an infringement of Afghanistan's sovereignty. So the whole thing becomes a kind of a vicious circle, and it's very, very difficult to find a way out of. For the last 20 years, these issues have been gone through. The Americans have tried very hard and ultimately failed in trying to resolve this securitization paradigm. And as I said, there's no easy answer out of this till something emerges in Afghanistan itself. I think the day by which external powers could improvise a solution, I mean the regional powers, I think those days are fast disappearing. It doesn't appear that easy. So the situation ahead is going to be quite difficult, at least in my view. I think on the ceasefire between Pakistan and India, there are many explanations and reasons which are given. I would go by the simple explanation, which was that it was in the interests of both countries to lower the temperature in their bilateral relationship and reduce frictions, and enforcing an older ceasefire seemed to be the easiest way to do it.
Right. General Astana, I want you to weigh in on this spillover, so-called spillover effect, which might impact India in particular, the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, with reports of the Islamic State Khorasan being active or maintaining links with remnants of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Also, Pakistan supported terror groups operating against India. Is that a clear and present danger for India?
Certainly, because ISKP on their target list, I think Kashmir figures very high. Similarly, the Al-Qaeda in South Asia, AQIS, they also are looking at Kashmir as well as Xinjiang, both. Similarly, the terrorist groups which are now operating from Pakistan in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is working as a safe haven under Taliban control in their areas for very simple reason, because a number of terrorists whom they were finding it uncomfortable to hold on in Pakistan due to the FATF sword hanging on their head, they actually transported them to Afghanistan. So that was another issue. Now those guys will become again available to them once, maybe a little later. Two things I want to highlight, in fact, add on. One is the ceasefire issue. The ceasefire, as Ambassador mentioned, certainly it suited us. It also was very important to give some relief to the civil population, both sides. And also, if you have ceasefire, then infiltration is lesser. So, ceasefire is very well welcomed. Other than ceasefire, I don't buy any other idea that they were in a mood to bring the temperature down or something like that. They had a problem that they were expecting that because of US pulling out, the Pashtuns may create problems, and they wanted to do the fencing fast. And therefore, they wanted to remove some troops from here and put it on the western border, Afghanistan border. So that was their compulsion to go into for this, in addition to the economic compulsions. The second thing which I want to highlight is Pakistan certainly, even if we say that, okay, Taliban is Sunni kind of ideology, and therefore Pakistan will have an upper edge or something like that. Taliban, even when in power, never compromised on Durand line. So Taliban, even when they are in power, they are Afghanis first and Pakistanis friends later. Secondly, the refugees influx is also worrying Pakistan. And in that refugee influx, certain cadres which are inimical to Pakistani interest may also get in. That is also one of the worries of Pakistan. So it's not all that hunky-dory. And the last thing is that Pakistan, why it is so allergic to Indian presence is that they feel that if we are there, then we are encircling them from all sides. That is their perception, which they want to sell to their population for various reasons, which we all know. So these are some of the issues, perhaps, which, and certainly Kashmir is a concern, and that is why the export of terrorism does become a concern if the conglomeration of terrorists increases in Afghanistan, which seems to be the case as the writings are on the wall.
Right. Altaf, you get the last word as an Afghan on this panel. What would you say to our viewers in India and around the world? Also, do you have any personal recollections of the Taliban rule of 1996? I mean, are there any anecdotes that you might want to share with our viewers? Also, the human cost of war. Have you had, friends or family or relatives who had to face the brunt of the internecine struggle in Afghanistan over the last several decades now?
Yeah, the human cost is too big, actually. Well, according to United Nations figures, I could say like tens of thousands of Afghan civilians have been killed since 2001. And when the Taliban took over Afghanistan in 1990s, they started massacring Hazara people. Well, I'm from Hazara people actually, so I do remember that how they invaded my hometown Mazar Sharif and how they arrested my uncle when they just stormed our house and arrested my uncle because my uncle used to work during the Najibullah government as an army general. So they arrested him, they tortured him. So yes, the 1990s was a kind of nightmare for me and for all members of my family.
Right, on that note, Elsaf Najafizada, Ambassador T.C. Raghavan, General Astana, and Ms. Nandan Unikrishnan, thank you once again for making time for us here at DD India. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
But before we close, did you know that there have been more changes to the Afghan flag in the 20th century than any other country? It has seen 19 changes to it. Now, if you did not notice it, the Afghan flag has the three colors, black, red, and green. Now, black denotes the past, red depicts the blood shed for Afghanistan's independence, and green stands for hope, future, or the religion Islam. The question confronting Afghanistan, India, and the world at large is this: how much more Afghan blood will be spilled if the Taliban smells blood? With that, it's a wrap. But news continues here on DD India. You can catch all the latest updates on our social media, mobile, and digital platforms. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.